Radio OKiTALK, Radio OKiTALK, von Mensch zu Mensch.
And this was Small Print Recordings Kercha, Ghosts Don't Exist, to introduce once again the Wizard of Oz, Bryan. Be most welcome. Good evening, Bryan. How are you?
How are you? I'm really happy to be here again, and greetings to everyone out in Radio Land.
Yes, internet, radio, free radio land in that sense. Yeah, ghosts don't exist. What do you say about that? Especially also regarding the music effects of the track.
Yeah, really crazy. You know, it's so simple and pared down, but it's just really interesting throughout the entire track. And what a great emotional vibe it has. Love it.
Basically, what I want to allude to is that the title name may be kind of tongue-in-cheek in terms of ghosts don't exist. I was trying to use it now as a hook, maybe, you know, to get you to start talking about whether you would agree with that, or I don't know, what, you know, however one may come up with this as an artist. Probably tongue-in-cheek, I assume.
Well, you know, ghosts don't exist. I would have to vigorously disagree with that. I think there are all kinds, you know, people have a tendency to think of beings in the astral as like angels or demons, dead people, and their spirit guides, you know, but in reality, it's as populated as, you know, imagine going to the rainforest in Brazil and imagine how many different kinds of life forms there are there, all different shapes, sizes, and that's the way the astral is too. So I couldn't disagree more.
Maybe just right off the bat, I know today we want to talk about, for example, also your favorite magic books, which of course is an amazing topic we will certainly get into. Just one thing that comes to my mind straight off the bat, let's say, that I find, I mean, at least maybe not many of the listeners, but I'm listening to quite a lot of, let's say, so-called alternative news. Also, and that may be the particularity, American type, let's say, alternative news. And there, of course, you have very many interesting channels, you know, ranging from angels and aliens up to whatever type of, you know, information, medical or otherwise. However, what you also have there, of course, is quite a large population of Christians, let's say. And what I find so extremely interesting, and maybe you would like to comment on this, is the different perspectives that are then created. Some of them, let's say, quite maybe in a positive way defiant. So in the terms of like, I stand with Jesus and let's say against, quote unquote, against things that are against life or for things that are for life, whatever this may mean. However, quite often what they are also doing, it seems to me, especially in the discussions about, let's just say interdimensional beings, is that very oftentimes, either directly or indirectly, they create some kind of a fear-based scenario, which I sometimes find kind of sad because I see that they have very positive intention and very positive hearts, but then kind of seem to, let's say, lump all the spirits together into a negative category just because there may have been some individuals in particular interested, let's say, also in whatever, you know, domination and control, and that kind of gives the whole thing, or let's say even all interdimensionals, a bad rap from the point of view of, let's say, certain evangelicals, if that makes sense to you. Maybe you can relate even more as you're right there.
You know, you hit on a topic that's kind of near and dear to my heart right now, because what I see going on in the world interpersonally is people fragmenting into specialized groups of interest, and then their view gets macroed down to that's the only thing that exists, and then fostering in many cases also an intolerance for any other point of view. And you know, my experience has been that, you know, yeah, lumping people into groups of people never works out because everybody is completely unique and a universe unto themselves, and they might have some combined experiences, but saying because you had an experience with this kind of person that every kind of person like that is just crazy. And I see that going on socially, I see that going on magically, and it's just kind of crazy. The way I view it, it's like this like if you were looking up in the sky and it was this huge faceted diamond that was just slowly turning, and you're getting to look into each of those facets, and every one of them is beautiful. Every one of them is tuned to a certain way to get to the one at the base of that, but I like them all, I mean, it's like I don't subscribe to the Christian manifest, but if that works for somebody, cool. The problem I have is most of the major religions were sort of constructed more out of crowd control than spiritual growth, and they all sort of foster this is the only way to go. And as long as that's a mindset, there can never be any peace. There can never be any peace in Israel as long as Jews and the guys in Hamas and that are at the other person has to go, and there has to be a winner or a loser in that fight. And that's I think if there was just a resurgence of tolerance and appreciation for everyone's selection of what path is right for them, then we'd have a lot more harmony and unity in the world, and an appreciation of what other people are doing and their cultures and their beliefs. It's like I have many Jewish friends. I've really enjoyed understanding that. I have many Islamic friends. I've enjoyed exploring that. I explored that for a number of years. And, I was raised a good Catholic kid. So, there you go. Yeah, which probably explains why I became a ceremonial magician. But, magically,
That's a great connect, yeah.
Magically as well, it's if you're tuned to be a really great channeler and you channel alien spirits, there's going to be someone else that channels different frequency spirits, maybe interdimensional spirits, and someone else that does angelic beings, and someone else that does the dark spirits. And, all of those are worthwhile points of view and avenues of exploration, and allowing people to make their choices without having to agree with your point of view or else they're wrong, I think would be a really great step in the right direction these days.
I may have mentioned, I'll just maybe continue down that lane if I may for a moment. And I may have mentioned this before. However, what I always find to be for me, one of the defining aspects of any worldview or belief system when I am assessing them is, include my own or any other, is whether they allow space for the inclusion of the validity of all other belief systems as well. And the understanding that belief creates reality. Therefore, I can understand that whatever belief one may have, that belief actually may and actually is working for them. And that, of course, gives so different perspective on any type of dogmatic approaches and saying this is the only way, which, of course, many religions do, which I always find kind of strange. And also this I may have mentioned, yet still I think it's interesting, and I'd like your take on this, is this idea that, they always say God is great, and no matter what religion, basically, and in some way, shape or form, whether they then talk about Krishna or whatever. And then I'm always like, okay, well, how great is your God? If your God is truly that great, they always talk about, omnipresent, omnipotent. And if one doesn't really understand these concepts, it may seem kind of strange. But when one kind of looks through it, then it just means, okay, that means it's the entire universe. This is an all-inclusive concept.
If you're trying to anthropomorphize and put a face or some sort of personal description of omnipotence, that's not going to work very well, you know. So I think that's where it fails. I think all of them, you know, it's personifying this being that is everything. And how can you singularly personify something that is all,
Well, yeah, well,
you know?
totally. And then if you really want to do it, what I'd recommend to everyone, if you want to meet God, you know, go to your bathroom, take a look in the mirror. If you want to, you know, complain to someone,
You know,
or
that's the whole thrust behind the path I've been on and the energy work I'm doing, because that energy that is yours that you access is a part of God. And that whole process isn't something that I view now as, oh, it's just something I do, you know, like playing guitar or something. But it is the thing that has become sacred to me, because when I'm in the depth of my practice and I'm there in totality, that's when I get to actually experience God. And that's the most sacred thing in my life. And you know, I wish people could find that part. They're looking for it outside themselves, but it's right there, just waiting for them to grab and realize. And that's when you watch that happen for somebody, it's pretty miraculous.
And just to maybe somewhat demystify this idea, the way I would see it, when then different religions or different esoteric systems, whatever, they speak about having successfully spoken with Jesus, or, you know, being in contact with God. And however, I would translate this simply as a temporary shift in state of consciousness to a higher frequency level, which then is interpreted by anyone and everyone according to their own belief systems, and then translates into, oh, you know, now I communed with God. Or just as you mentioned, and I'm not discounting what you said in any way, shape, or form, I'm just kind of supposing that these moments when then from a human perspective, we would naturally say, oh, there I've been in contact with a greater force, then of course, again, it's just your own force. You're always in contact with it. It's just that in these moments, you do whatever you need to do according to your own belief systems to allow yourself to more easily shift into that higher frequency state, which then, let's say, calls forth all of these marvelous images and emotions and so on, which of course are very real unto themselves. However, I would kind of say that's maybe the common denominator.
I would agree with you totally. And those moments, you know, when you realize your own energy and can make that really bright and vibrate at a high frequency, then that's when you can connect to the beings that are vibrating higher than our normal vibration, you know. And sometimes there are many kinds of beings that are way smarter than we are. And you know, I think a lot of times people that urge might be coming from God, but I think people filter it through whatever belief system they have and whatever concept of the universe they can have without going crazy and comprehend, you know, because it just keeps getting bigger and bigger and more distant from anything that we know as normality here, you know, the higher the frequency goes. So I think a lot of times those, if you were raised Christian and you expected a holy feeling to come from Jesus, then that's probably how that's going to manifest. And I'm not saying that isn't, you know, it very well may be that personification that billions of people have used. There's substance behind that belief now. I mean, that's thousands of years of billions of people driving energy into that same concept and that persona of Jesus. So of course that has reality, you know. And I think if you're a Christian and that's where you've been your entire life, that those kind of impulses are going to be interpreted either as an angel or usually Jesus, and having that epiphany of a moment of realization where you feel that higher vibration and all of a sudden it's like, oh, wow, man, what just happened? I became something else for a second there, and that can happen as Krishna or Allah or any of the other ones, or yourself, mainly
Yeah.
yourself. Yeah. So I agree with you in totality.
The other thing maybe that may be interesting is, so this idea basically, yesterday I heard an interview with, let's say, someone somewhat following prophetic ideas, and he was explaining many very interesting things, which is actually also something you may want to slightly comment on. I know that one time we spoke on Aleister Crowley. Of course, there's this whole other huge thing with, let's just say, I was almost about to say now, Jack Parsons' laboratory, but it's actually Jet Propulsion's laboratory, so JPL. And also here the whole connections with Crowley, with L. Ron Hubbard, with the whole space situation, let's say, however psyoped or PR style that whole stunt may be or not. And what I just found so interesting then was from this, let's say, biblically interpreted perspective, this guy basically said, look, they trying to connect with this and that beings. And then he's kind of said, look, we know from the scripture because of this and that, he was kind of like proposing that that's not part of God's sanctified creation, which of course, from the very basic idea of God being omnipresent and omnipotent, just doesn't make sense. So maybe what I would like to flesh out a tiny bit, if there's anything really to say about it, is what the potential pitfalls are, or where to look out for, not to kind of progress or, maybe even make great developments, but then still kind of, I don't know, stay stuck somewhat somewhere where you still allow, even though your love for Jesus may be that great, or however you want to put it, you still allow for some idea of a separation, which, it may then be expressed by creating basically any type of an enemy scenario, or I'm not finding the proper word now. In German, I'm pretty sure it's known even in English, it's called Feindbild, so when there's an enemy, the day has structure, right?
Right. Well, I'm not sure what part of that to comment on.
Basically, just very simply, maybe what your personal experience is with this whole idea of realizing, let's say, unity consciousness, and then what you may have observed, if there is anything generalizable about this even, where people then maybe make some progress, but then still kind of stay stuck, or that's just a perspective of mine, of course, now, but yeah.
Well, the thing about the concept of unity, pretty much throughout my metaphysical path, was kind of just a concept. But where that came to transmute from knowledge to experience, and I'll say wisdom for lack of a better word at the moment, but grokking it in fullness, was when I learned to really see my aura in detail, and I could see the structure of it and how many segments there were to it, from the first, the second, the third, the fourth, the fifth, the sixth, and you realize that it goes out infinitely. So if your own energy is spread out like that, anyone you're even remotely close to, you're connected to. So it just went, it bloomed like a flower for me, and I was like, oh man, I really get it. We really are connected. We really are one. Our energy fields interact with each other and create a whole of possibilities that are constantly circling the planet and out further. And from those possibilities, depending on the actions of the larger population and what the strongest wave is, possibilities get selected and then manifest in our world. And so it's about finding where you're connected with other people and magnetizing, those parts of you that draw the things you need from other people and from the universe at large.
So basically, I would also agree it is very much, no matter how one may talk about it conceptually, it is also very much about a very individualized and personalized journey, and potentially also, probably quite often, at some point, some potentially even quite visceral experience, where then, at least that's how it was for me, I would call it I called it back then, I called it kind of like the first frame or something like this in terms of how you define yourself. That's the vision I got, was just me basically being an unconditioned entity and then going through very, very many frames, including the frame of space and time, the frame of being a human incarnate, the frame of this earth reality, and then the frame of all kinds of rules until I kind of, arrive here. But then the difference is that once unity maybe has been experienced viscerally and is truly remembered in that sense, that then the perspective shifts from a first frame, maybe let's say of imagined separation, to an even previous frame of understanding that separation is just a concept within unity, if that makes sense.
Well, it does, but I'd like to elaborate a little further on that, in that, unity for me, is not defined as everybody thinks the same thing and everybody has the same point of view and everybody agrees with this line of action. To me, unity is I have long subscribed to the premise that we are all individual universes experiencing things that the larger God experiences, and that's the way that God experiences through all of us individually. So why would he want any of those universes to be exactly the same and be thinking exactly the same? And it's where the intolerance for the way other people walk their path that creates disunity and conflict, and it's where people find acceptance and take responsibility for their own sphere and stop trying to manipulate everyone else's sphere to look exactly like yours. That real unity can exist, because that's the nature of the kind of creatures we are, and continuing to try to fit everybody into these boxes is just not going to work.
Maybe what's interesting to elaborate upon a little bit from your perspective is this whole idea, what Bashar quite often mentions, and of course I would wholeheartedly agree, the idea being that one may have much more empathy, even or understanding, or as you said, this grokking, which maybe also briefly want to explain what grokking means, as it's a quite special magic term, let's say. So now I'm completely...
One of my
Yes.
favorite words from an old science fiction book by Robert Heinlein called "Stranger in a Strange Land," and he came from another world and sort of became an alien came from another world, and just showed up here and started becoming a world leader. And one of his things, as he was learning our culture, was, you would get the information, but after you've experienced the information and it takes on a whole new emotional reality to you that you've actually tasted, that's grokking it in fullness. That's understanding it totally, not just the information, but the experience as well. So that's one of my favorite terms. Actually, Jim used that the last time we were on, and I was like, wow, another grokker. Go ahead, sorry.
Yes, I don't have it in my active vocabulary. I know it from a book, which is a quite famous book, I believe. Of course, I forget the title at this point, but it's about a Hawaiian shaman. And there they explain about how they were able even to divert hurricanes through grokking. And Yeah, I think you explained it perfectly fine. Anything you would like to add, as I actually lost my question on the way.
No, I think I've said my piece on that one.
All right, perfect. Then, what do you say? We play some more music, and then we maybe, if you like, open one chapter on this whole idea of then, favorite magic books and maybe, intellectual concepts, different interesting ideas and written word, spoken word that may eventually also, of course, help us to grok this unity idea.
Sounds great.
And we are back live with the Wizard of Oz, Bryan. So, right now we may get into talking about what magic books and concepts and so on we may get into until you release your grimoire, and or as we have a request from the audience actually to draw a card, we may use this opportunity to maybe once again illustrate.
I'm shuffling right now.
Yeah, to illustrate the ultimate magic book, of course, which would be the tarot cards, let's say, interpreted in a multidimensional fashion. All right, so yeah, Harp Wolkenbruch or Harp Cloudbreak actually is asking for this. So yeah, Bryan, kindly go ahead and yeah, Harp will get its answer.
I'm doing that right now. Okay, so I pulled the Star, one of my favorite cards, probably because it's Aquarius. But for me, the Star is about, well, first of all, it's the card where the water of life is being poured upon a thirsty world. So if you're thirsty for direction or anything happening in your life, that is about to be nourished. The other thing that I really love about the Star is that it's come to represent wishes fulfilled. Not and when I say wishes, I'm not like talking about just superficial. Oh, I'd like that to happen. Or I'd like that to happen. But those core, uh, deep inside passions and your wishes for your involvement and for your growth and for your education and all levels. And that's the thing that really winds up having that represented. The thing about that card, though, is that that's not that card usually refers to something in the very near future, but not like today. It's not like an immediate scenario, but it's the wave of what's coming for you. So if you could prepare yourself and put your catcher's mitt on to catch what the universe sends you, I think you've got some really good things coming your way very shortly.
As I always like to look at these things contextually, which I know you do as well. Is there something you would like to mention about this major arcana's card's position within the major tarot?
Well, certainly in the fool's journey, it's right there at the end with the moon, the star, the moon, and the sun. So it's the most intense planetary influences, those three cards at that, and it's sort of towards, I think that card is 17, and going up to 21. So it's the eon and the universe. Yeah, so the eon for me represents, and this is I got a lot of my original tarot interpretations from the top deck. I read with that deck for about 25 years. So
kindly mention again which deck or what book? It's just
the top deck, the Aleister Crowley top deck. Yes. So a lot of my meanings kind of came from there, and they've grown. Certainly, since I've done my own deck, I have been given I go and interacted with those, especially the major arcana archetypes. So, you start to form your own language with your higher self and exactly what that means to you. And so those last cards: star, the moon, the sun, the eon, which for me represents your ally, your higher self on the next plane of frequency, and then the last card is the universe, which is all the marbles. So those are very, very. That's very. That's a very powerful section of the deck, and one where a lot of the lessons that happened earlier in the deck, with the Hanged Man, the Tower, death, those things, those lessons learned then come to fruition and those glorious blooming cards at the end of the deck. At least that's my perspective.
Yes, it's almost like that all the ideas or the desires even that have been presented or expressed early in the journey and somewhat realized, but then are then quickly taken for a tour down into the underworld. Eventually, of course, they are realized. So let's say maybe the strength card, number 8, which already wants to be the sun, eventually does become the sun. And of course, at the very end, all the marbles in a multi-dimensional holographic sense. I believe there's even some myths referencing marbles in combination or in association with the idea that everything is interconnected and all is one. So maybe on the terms of different books, if you would like to get into that right now, maybe we could actually start with some more ideas about learning about tarot.
Well, actually, I kind of like to take you to another place, if you don't mind, to get started. I'd love to end up there, but I kind of had, books are really important to me. I've been a bibliophile since I was a very, very small boy, and I love making my own books, and I love the art of books, the craft of just bookmaking itself, and I had to be a scribe or a bookmaker in a past life or two, because I just had this really deep appreciation for them, and when I got started, there wasn't any internet, there wasn't as widely accessible information, and really the only way you had to learn is either from a teacher or from books, or hopefully both of those. But that was certainly my journey, and I had an event that happened when I was 30 years old that kind of changed my path from a super interested dabbler to a serious student. So I thought I would share that with you because it relates to a book specifically. I was working in an ad agency at the time, and I was kind of late for a meeting. This is in Atlanta, good walk. And 30 years ago. And I'm driving back to the office. It's raining. I don't really have time to do anything, but I'm driving by one of my favorite book stops, which was called the Book Nook. And it was a used bookstore that specialized in art books and science fiction books and just crazy kind of obscure books of all kinds. And I frequently made a visit into there, and I'm driving by, not really thinking about it. And honestly, my car just turned left and went, okay, you got to go to the Book Nook. So I'm like, wow, what's up with that? I go running in, I'm all soaked from the rain, and I'm looking down, my favorite little areas, and I look up, and there is a leather-bound copy of the Necronomicon. And I had just recently started getting into collecting grimoires of other magicians, and that had the Necronomicon had always kind of held this strange place for me. I was a big Lovecraft fan growing up and read most of all those books, and it was always considered to be kind of a myth, or maybe it didn't actually exist. So I reach up and I pull it down off, and I'm all excited. My heart's pounding, and I start looking through it, and there are penciled notes in it that like somebody had used the book before. And I'm like, wow, this is crazy. And I'm getting this feeling off of it, like it's just buzzing. And I'm like, dude, you need to have this book. So I looked at how much it was. It was $150. And I was like, wow, man, that's a lot of money. I don't really have that right now. So I wound up having to go off. I was directing a bunch of spots for a hotel client we had that was going to take like 2 weeks on the road. So I left and flew off, and I thought about that book the whole time. I was like, dude, you should, wow, oh man, I can't believe you didn't get that. So when I landed, I drove, instead of going home, I went straight to the book nook to see if that book was still there. And I went up, it wasn't there. I went up to the desk and I asked the guy, I said, hey, is that book still around? He goes, wow, that's really weird. About 15 minutes ago, somebody just came in and bought it. And I was like, no, God, man. So I went on about my business. About a week and a half, 2 weeks went by, and I'm like, well, let's stop in. And I go cruising in, and what's up on the shelf? But it looks like the same book. I opened it up, and it happened to be one of their first editions, so it was signed and numbered, and I knew it was exactly the same book, and it's got all the notes and everything. And I'm like, wow, okay, cool. So I grab it and I run up to the desk to pay for it. And the guy kind of like gets a weird face on. He goes, you sure you want this book? I said, yeah, why? He goes, well, somebody just came back in, didn't even try to sell it. They just like dropped it off about 15 minutes ago. Said, here, I don't want this book, which made me want it even more. So I got it and took that thing home, and it was just some of the craziest magic I had ever like seen, and it was just beyond. And it wasn't so much the magic that was in that particular grimoire, but the thing that was really a watershed moment for me was this amazing bibliography of other magic books that had been used to construct this. And, there were Crowley books, there were Manly Hall books, there were like Bardon books, there was Agrippa's for books on occult philosophy, and the whole listing, most of those I had not heard of yet. So I went on a quest to get as many of those as I could and start just filling my brain up and figure this out. And so that was just a crazy, crazy, crazy moment where like life changes in just a few seconds to be something different. So I started acquiring all these books, and my wife at the time was not cool with it at all. Was like way over the top, like, oh, this is awful, this is horrible, you can't do this, you can't bring this home. I'm like, wow, man, I don't really have there. It wasn't like I had a choice. It was like this was a call, this was a need that came from deep inside, and it was like, God, man, get on it already. You're already 30 years old. So we had a lot of other issues too. We wound up getting divorced, and when I got divorced and was on my own, man, I went into it full bore. And Crowley's Magic Without Tears, the 4 books, it was just Barrett's The Magus. The Key of Solomon. Oh my word, that was such a fruitful journey and exploration, and all of that came out of one single book, which just blew me away. So that event like set me off. So I'm bringing to the party 3 books. Two books that were super influential in my growth, and the last book, which is not only super influential in my growth, but like if I only had one book I could take to the desert island I was going to be on for the rest of my life, it would be this book. So the first book is a book called The Center of the Cyclone, and it was by a guy named John C. Lilly, who came out in the late 60s. And at the time, he was one of the foremost researchers into dolphins and understanding their intellectual capacities. And he was also one of the early researchers into sensory deprivation and using LSD. And the book starts off with his experiments with LSD and the deprivation tank, which, by the way, I've done the deprivation tank, I've done the LSD. I don't think I would want to do both of those together. So he has a fight with his wife and winds up going and doing an injection. He was getting Sandow's 25 LSD for research purposes, the purest you could get.
Yes,
So
and just to mention, this is industrially produced, right? This is pharmaceutical official industry stuff.
That's correct. This was the time when it was a legitimate research subject. You know, it wasn't demonized yet, and people were still looking into it for its uses, and instead of criminalizing it. So anyway, he pulls an air bubble up into the syringe, and when he injects himself, the bubble goes to his brain. He goes into a coma. While he's in this coma, in this near-death state, he has a journey to what I call black space, which is the illuminated space where nothing is at, and everything is possible from that place. And while he was there, he met two of his spirit guides who had been with him a long time, and they told him that the point of what happened to him was for them to be able to connect with him and to let him know of them as possibilities, but that now the journey was to be able to reconnect with them on a normal spiritual level by elevating your frequency instead of using it, instead of it being chemically induced. And then that's what the rest of that book was about. But that was so influential to me that there was a real place that he was talking about that I had gone to myself but didn't understand at all. And that became information that I really used to focus, to contact the many guides and spirits that were around with me. And that was kind of the inception of that scenario. After the Necronomicon experience, one of the very first books that I came across was a book that I still use to this day. I still think it's one of the most magnificent books on metaphysics ever published, and that would be Manly P. Hall's The Encyclopedic Outline in Masonic, Hermetic, Kabbalistic, and Rosicrucian Philosophy. So that book was like the Whitman sampler of Western magic. And it had probably 150 different paths, ceremonial magic, sigils. That's where I first got exposed to the Shemha Meforish, the system of 72 angels that I used to do as a basis for the angel deck, oracle deck.
Amazing.
You know?
Just briefly, ignorant me, of course, wasn't even aware that such a type book exists by Manly P. Hall. I just know of his lectures on the consolation of philosophy on Boethius, I think, which is kind of nice. And what I personally have read, which may be a somewhat more easy starter for some, is The Secret Teachings of All Ages, also by Manly P. Hall.
Well, I think that's the later title for the book I'm talking to you about. It's The Secret Teachings of All Ages. It's a compendium of pretty much every kind of Western magic you can imagine, correct?
All right. Yeah. Well, it's about, basically, they say it's many books in one book. So it's like 50 pages per chapter. There's chapters on the Kabbalistic keys to the creation of man. And there is a section on Pythagorean numerology. There's a section on the illusion mysteries. And then, just as we mentioned and talk about this, just because I briefly had, again, revisited this, and some YouTuber or someone made the very interesting comment. Have you ever considered his name to be somewhat strange?
Manly P. Hall.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
I mean, especially considering, the symbolic meaning of names, or the, I don't know, trickster nature of this reality. I don't even know how to put it at this point. And the most certainly interesting affiliations he had, whatever they may or may not have been. Yeah, certainly Manly P. Hall, anyone can just, look at these letters and words and so on. And then, maybe even this is another level of some kind of an interesting cosmic joke. I'm not sure.
Well, you know what? I'm dying now that you mentioned that. I have never done the numerology and taken apart that name. After we get off this afternoon, I'll dive into that and see what I can dig up. And that, yeah, I'm all curious now. It's like a little treasure hunt.
Yeah, I mean, who is called Manly? I mean, that's actually not really a name, at least not one I had heard of before.
Well, I have to say the Guru. I read most of his books, and very, very. I so appreciate his, especially with the Secret Teachings book. With that, it gives you such a great exposure in ways, like I was so uneducated at the time that a lot of the stuff, like the Crowley books, I really couldn't grok it at all, because I was having every other third word to go like look up what that word meant.
Yeah,
I was so.
That's why I mentioned this book, exactly. Yeah.
And this one really puts it in terms I could digest and kind of get a good idea about. And it was really instrumental then in helping me focus on several of those areas that like really lit up for me. That's how you know which ones to follow. It's like you look at all the buffet of different things available, and the thing that like lights up and makes your solar plexus tingle, that's the one you go down. So it was really super helpful in directing me down the first couple of paths I went to. And I'm going to make this comment about the next book I bring up too, but the thing I so appreciate about the Secret Teachings book is that you can go through that book from cover to cover and really get it, and okay, cool. And then, you spend a year or two practicing and growing and learning, and you come back to it with a new perspective, and all of a sudden you're reading it at this deeper level, and it's like you've never read the book before. And I've been able to do that with that book like 10 or 12 times. And just the other day, this weekend, when I was thinking about what I wanted to, I've got thousands of books. Pulling out 3 for this conversation was a bit of a challenge, to say the least. But the thing about that book, and one of the reasons I find it so satisfying, is that the levels of it never seem to exhaust themselves. And for me, that's how you tell the real gems in the books about magic and metaphysics at large. The ones that you can continue to sink deeper and deeper and deeper into understanding with are the ones that are the fruit on the tree for me. Okay, so
just to briefly comment and maybe emphasize what you mentioned, I had first read the book when I believe it was about let's just say quite some years ago, and had some interesting experiences afterwards. Read it again, or read parts of it again, and of course had more expanded understanding. What I can just
what kind of experiences did you have? What happened?
Yes, I'll gladly mention. Kindly just mute your mic so we don't have any feedback.
Yeah,
thank you. So, well, basically for me, it was, I mean, it's even illustrated on my website. To anyone who is interested in the actual details, you can read about it. I mean, I'm sure I told you anyhow. Let's just say a very actually simple type of altered states of consciousness, somewhat visionary states. And basically, the gist of it simply being that I had let's say, this idea of a more visceral experience of unity, and then rereading the book, and then something which previously I may have also understood on different levels, but then understanding it again on a much deeper level. And what I think about here in particular is, as you mentioned, many other books are written extremely in a very esoteric fashion and can be quite difficult to understand. This book really is actually relatable. And one of the chapters I like the most actually is the Kabbalistic keys to the creation of man, because it describes Adam, or in a sense, let's say the man in general, asking to enter the Garden of Eden again, and then having a conversation with the Garden of the Threshold. And yeah, let's just say interesting twists in the story, which is, at least to me, quite enlightening. And just to mention, or to again emphasize how thin the veil is right now, anyone pulling up your favorite search engine right now and you put in the secret teachings of all ages, Manly Paul Mahal, you will find different variants easily findable and accessible. And yeah, so everyone can read it.
You really want the version that has the gorgeous illustrations in it. The artwork is just over the top, and it exposed me to some of my favorite occult artists, like the guy named Robert Flood, and really those illustrations really helped me understand and sink into it deeper. And as an artist, they influenced me very, very greatly.
Yeah, to me, getting into this whole thing, I very vividly remember, even years before finding that book, again and again doing random searches on the internet, maybe before there was as much information as there is now. And seemingly, it seemed almost impossible for me to find a proper connection to these kind of books, or even know what to look for, what to search for, or something which has actual, juice in it. So I was just extremely happy when I found this book. And even though the book he references are also, one would categorize them today as medieval and may not be the easiest to understand, but again, here at the very least, as you mentioned, the amazing pictures, even just that. And I believe also, actually, this is another key, as I understand it, is this whole idea that, let's say, the more esoteric religions, or let's just say the esoteric understanding, so the hidden understanding or the inner understanding, often actually can be much easier be accessed by looking at pictures, which can be great because it's not maybe such a mental churn, or one can at least alternate between these approaches. And then, of course, these illustrations are perfectly beautiful, extremely interesting to see, the different categorizations, the different ways someone can make an image of the world and categorize it, or whatever other, amazingly interesting things there may be. So definitely, I can just agree, this is an amazing starting point.
Really amazing images, and there are some people that absorb energy or information best through audio. I'm one of those visual guys, and if I can see it and have a picture of it in my mind, all of a sudden I feel like it's graspable. So I as I'm going along trying to learn out of this book, would make my own interpretive artwork that referenced what I was learning right at the moment. And I found that super, 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 super helpful, and would strongly encourage anyone to do that as well. It's a really useful tool that, as you're visualizing it and constructing it with enough clarity in your mind to get it on a piece of paper, it takes on a new clarity in totality in your energy as well, that I really, really find useful. Hey, I also want to throw out to anybody out there, I'd love to know what, what's your favorite book too. Please feel free to send them in. I'd love to see where you guys are at too.
Yes, I think that's a great idea. Everyone may be sharing this, and also, no matter whether it's, I would say, a highly, let's say, complex magic book, or maybe even a very simple book, could even be a book on, I don't know, proverbs or something. There is, I would say, gems to be found in any category or any type of book or media, sometimes even where one may not suspect it, actually. So,
one of my favorite ways to use numerology, you break your name and your birth date down into four, or this is my method. You break your name and your birthday down into four different numbers. The first being the numbers constructed from your birth date, which is your life lesson number. So any book that's of a metaphysical nature, or any book, art, math, anything on physics, anything I'm trying to learn, I have a question about, the very first thing I'll do is get that book and turn it to page 26, which happens to be my life lesson number. And every single time there's like, oh man, what a great piece, and gets me started down the road with that. It's kind of amazing. So I'd throw that out to you. I'd love for you to experiment with that too and see if you find that to be the case as well. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, well, all I can mention from a personal experience is that I was now actually expecting that you would be staying to have a, let's say, a first indicator of whether a book is interesting, just to do the numerology on the title. That's what I was assuming was what you were going to say now, which is also interesting. However, what you mentioned, which I believe can also be called bibliomancy, is something I employ sometimes. And funnily enough, now I'm going to kind of like disclose it. What I did somewhat recently is a friend showed me a book and he said, look, this book is really great. And it's a great book. It's about, of course, now again, I forgot the title, but it's basically about the Valley of the Immortals in India, and the story about a guy who apparently was somehow born there or something, but lives somewhere else or has some connection, and he meets someone else, and this stranger invites him to join this valley, but he's not ready yet. And then somehow years later, through very strange, synchronistic, either you could read it like a fiction story, or you just read it like, the reality of synchronistic craziness, which is what we are experiencing here. And then eventually he ends up in this valley and meets all these individuals who are, 300, 500 years old, just, meditating there. And supposedly you can also only find the place if you're on the right frequency, of course. All of these ideas. Anyhow, he gives me this book. And he's like, oh, you should read this, whatever, it's so great. And I'm like, okay, I really don't know. And I just take the book and I actually turn to page 99, which is part of my numerology. And then I turn to line 26, which is also part of my numerology. And there is just actually, I didn't understand it at that point because it was just a phrase. It was basically about, yeah, blah, 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 let's go to that place. And it just used exactly this term and this name of that place, which interestingly enough, now I can't remember. But anyhow, I can just reaffirm that this can work pretty well and just gives an interesting insight. And as with the tarot card, it's really just about even allowing yourself the possibility that this can be a way that call it your own unconscious or your own higher self, can communicate with you. And once you even just allow for that possibility and allow it, let's say, give it a chance that this can be a source of information for you, and then just apply these methods, even just and truly for fun and excitement, then I can just encourage everyone listening. This can be a very fun and quite enlightening experience. So yeah, thank you for referencing that idea.
Yeah, you're welcome. It's super useful. It's been a go-to now for 30 years. So everything that we're talking about, it's like, I hope that it doesn't come across like, oh, this is real. It's reality for us because we've experienced it. But I hope what happens is that some possibilities fly out there for people to latch onto to try themselves, because ultimately everything that it's all about the actuality of doing it and not just knowing about it, and that's the way you find the things that actually work for you.
Precisely, this is how it is. So would you like some more tunes, or would you like to get into the third book first?
Your call.
Well, then I'd say let's go for some music, and then we get into the third book and whatever else we have to discuss. All right? So I would say anybody not scared by such type of music maybe also is ready to read his first magic book. 3 is the magic number. Bryan.
Absolutely.
Yes, kindly do go ahead. We have, magic number 3, book number 3. I believe this would be the one for the desert island as well.
Yeah, this one. I think this, out of all the thousands of books I've read on the subject, this one most closely uh, resembles the path I'm working on now, and in an energy standpoint point of view. And it's a guy by a guy named Ron Rawn Clark, and it's called A Bardon Companion. And what he did was he was a devotee of the magician Franz Bardon, who wrote innumerable really useful grimoires over the years. And the thing I kind of liked about him was that he didn't really have any uh, lodge affiliations, or he wasn't really following anybody's rules. He was kind of forging out and using his own personal ingenium to explore his metaphysical world. And I have learned so much from his original series of books. But then Ron Clark published this book, and just like you were talking about with the Manly P. Hall thing, he writes in a way that I get so fast. It's like when you read those, like the Crowley book on the four books. That book is so full of terms that are specific to his thelemic point of view, and there aren't, and it's not just those specific terms. They specifically put in errors in there to throw people that aren't part of the scenario off base. So, like, after reading those books, the Agrippa books, all the old grimoires, and trying to understand all of this, to like have somebody put it in such concise, understandable, graspable terms. And this book is the quintessential example of the other thing you were talking about. I've read this book from cover to cover probably 15 times. And every single time, it's like I'm reading it from the first time I picked it up. Because with the skills that you glean and collect along the way of working through all the chapters in it to the end, all of a sudden you're a more evolved energy being than you were when you started that book, with a way deeper understanding and a way broader ability to actually manifest what he's talking about and make those things work. And from the very first chapter, like this book is amazing, and I've turned a number of people on to this, not ever expecting them to go into the more esoteric practices later on in the book. But there is a chapter on meditation at the beginning of this that breaks it down into 3 different practice methods.
If I may, for a second.
Yeah.
Step 1. Preface. Simple beginnings. I have chosen this title, Simple Beginnings, to emphasize that step 1 is just the beginning and that it is simple. The reason I say that the exercises are simple is because every exercise in step 1 makes conscious and intentional use of completely natural processes and abilities. Ordinarily, we use these abilities every day without thinking them in the least bit special or magical. What transforms them from the ordinary into the magical is the application of one's conscious intention. So that is the very first paragraph of the book.
Yeah, right? I mean, okay, right there. It's like, you've got me. And that's so exactly right. That's so exactly right. It's so exactly right. He's not selling dogma. He's selling keys to the doors. It's so cool, man. It really is. So you want me to describe that first meditation thing, the breakdown on it?
Certainly.
Okay. The first step of it is to be able to sit quietly and just watch your thoughts, which when I I undertook to do this exercise myself, I was like, oh man, that's easy. I sat down to watch my thoughts, and the second I sat down to watch them, they stopped. And I was like, go ahead, think. No, I want to watch you. No, 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 no. That's all right. So that exercise was super fruitful. Then the next exercise was to take a thought and stay focused on that thought and follow that thought for as far as it would go. And we're talking about sessions that aren't super long, just like 5 or 10 minutes. Okay, so that was a really fruitful thing. And then the very last one was the most rewarding of all. And that is to be able to shut off your internal dialogue and go to zero space without thinking, and just to be there in that space. And that,
can I get a hallelujah?
Hallelujah. And that is the space from which miracles happened, like breathing. That is a miraculous space. And that's also the space from which you can launch yourself anywhere in the multiverse, to go anywhere inside yourself, to start understanding principles that were ungraspable before, and being able to calm yourself and go to that space has amazing physiological advantages as well, that make you healthier, that raise your physical vibration, that light up your aura, that keeps sickness and illness. You know, illness doesn't start in your body. It starts out in your energy field and works its way through the bands of your aura down through your first band, and once it goes through your first band into you, then it manifests into cancer or heart disease or whatever your particular weakness is. So, you know, being able to grasp all of those and use the things that are around you to create your own cosmology is what this is all about. And then the follow-up on these, you know, like the exercise of transmuting your consciousness from one being to another. And that's not just going in and reading something's mind. It's actually sharing their consciousness so that you experience the universe and the world from their perspective, not just from their vision, but from how they understand the world. And I started really small with my own exercises. I did ants and honeybees and bumblebees and wasps and butterflies. And man, what an incredible experience that was. And seeing those and feeling the world from those perspectives significantly changes you and your perspective of your place in the world. It's really good. And each of those exercises builds on the one before. It's like it's pointless to skip ahead to chapter 6 if you're only doing chapter 2, because you need all the things in the other chapters for the later chapters to work and actually be effective. So, you know, I've gone through it literally 15 times, and who knows how many more times before I shut my eyes for good, you know, and I couldn't recommend a book more highly. So that's pretty much what I have to say about that one. Franz Martin, a Bardon, or Ron Clark, a Bardon companion. It's you could take it to an island and never run out. Awesome.
Yeah, so I'm quite happy to have the book right here in my hands, actually. It's, well, by your recommendation, second copy I bought, and to my, however you would like to, whatever word you would want to put there, whatever it is, I haven't really approached these things in a fashion that is let's say, organized. However, I have some slight experience of some of the things you're talking about, and I would just like to re-emphasize the hallelujah about the zero state. This is an idea that some may have through whatever religious experience they are going through. Many may have through meditation. This may also be associated with what some may call samadhi. And the interesting idea about that state is whatever methods you're using to get there, hopefully something that's not detrimental to your health in any way, shape, or form. As soon as basically you're there, as you mentioned, you can go anywhere, and also you realize once again that, let's just say, your consciousness is primary and manifestation is secondary. And even then, if you reopen your eyes, you're still, human incarnate and so on. It can really help to remind yourself through, usually it's meditation or whatever other methods it may be, and get back to that zero state, and always reiterate and understand once again that truly circumstances don't matter, and it is the state of being that determines your interpretation of reality, and therefore also determines the type of experience you're having. And in this, of course, we're always free to choose. So just to re-emphasize this, let's say, zero state. Also, when I talk with friends,
zero space is one of the things that unifies every single method of spiritual evolution that there is. Whatever that is, whatever rituals, or, think about how many thousands of magical systems there are over the face of the earth.
And now let's call it Jesus, unconditional love, no?
At the center of all of those, at the base of all of those, lies zero space. And that's a great piece to have.
Which would translate it just be unconditional love, no? The unconditioned space.
I don't know that love to it yet. I think unconditional at that point. It's like the space of all possibilities without one being chosen yet. Love is kind of like, that's a choice, that's how you would intend to send that energy out. This is a space before that's even considered yet. It's neutral energy at its purest.
Precisely, I completely agree. I was using the word now in terms of meaning allowance, actually. And therefore, just understanding that basically for anything to exist, it must be allowed. And now again, from a somewhat personalized understanding of God, or however you want to put it, all I want to say with that is that God must love everything that exists unconditionally, otherwise it couldn't exist. So just kind of reiterating.
Well, everything is God, so how could it not love itself?
Oh, well, I believe that humans are the prime example of experimentations in that regard, no?
True that.
Yes. So, zero state, this is where it can also all come down to once again. So, in terms of books, maybe the one thing I would also be curious about is maybe some ideas you have in terms of tarot books in particular.
There are lots of books out there, but certainly within the last 10 years, and certainly since I made my own deck, I haven't really been delving into other people's interpretations and letting my own bloom fully for me. I already have kind of a really long history with the Rider-Waite deck. Was the first deck I learned really deeply, and then I read with a lot of different books of hermetic decks, a hermetic deck, a bunch of other different things. But I landed on the Crowley deck. I tried to learn that deck first, but it was just so far beyond me at the time that I went back to the Rider-Waite deck and stuck with that for about 5 years, and then a lot of other stuff started making sense for that. I do have a couple of websites I really dig that anybody that's starting tarot would benefit from. One of them is called supertarot.uk.com, and the guy's name is Barlow. What's his first name? I can't remember. Anything that the thing I really love about that is that he has a host of tarot exercises and layout options, and really goes into depth on each particular card. And the great thing about his descriptions of each card is that he offers up his own interpretation of it, which is usually pretty good. I don't agree with everything he has to say by any means. But then he also offers the Toth interpretation, the Rider-Waite interpretation, and like 5 or 6 other of the classical readers, from antiquity, and it gives their interpretations also. And it was really eye-opening for me to read through those different interpretations on this one card and see how so many people that supposedly had here's the answer, kind of differed. And it really made me aware that the end interpretation is really between the reader and his higher self, and the language of symbols that you wind up teaching. And once those teaching each other, and once that language is established, then your point of view can reach in and discern the situation for yourself or for someone else you're reading for, but you're not borrowing someone else's interpretations, because all those interpretations for the top deck, cool as they are, and one of the things he really did was connect elemental dignities and planetary associations, and he connected a lot of things that some of the other decks did not. But ultimately, those are all interpretations that were appropriate for Aleister Crowley specifically. And those were meanings that he worked out with his higher self and his earth consciousness to be able to divine possibilities. So ultimately those might be really close to what would be cool for you, but those meanings and interpretations are never going to be what comes out of your frequency exactly. And I think when you really get accurate is when you sort of abandon the ties to other people's energetic reach out to get those meanings, and start trusting your own energetic reach outs, and start being developing a system that you can remember. I have one friend that gets a different meaning on every single reading she does, and it's like, well, no, I don't think that exactly works. I mean, why do you need the cards in that circumstance? Just start spewing. But again, it comes down to that relationship between your ally and yourself with those.
Yeah, I would say that is ultimately maybe the true great work, to once again become completely sovereign in the interpretation of your own reality. Of course, then including the interpretation of any tarot card readings or meanings, even though, of course, we may be greatly informed by the perspectives of others, which on another level actually, of course, are just our own perspectives, personalized, individualized, and seemingly coming from the outside, although all is one, so it's another perspective of ourselves. And the 2 books I would like to mention, one actually I got through you, let's say, which is, they also have the most funny names, maybe again, strange pen names, recurring theme, Dusty Bunker and Faith Gervain. Not sure if these can be true names. Anyhow,
actually, I met them, and those are their names.
have you seen their ID? No,
Yeah.
not that this matters. Okay, that's crazy.
Yeah,
Then
that's a really, really influential book for me. I still use that. I've worn out 5 copies.
Then it's just divine synchronicity to have these kind of funny names. And as I understand it, correct me kindly if I'm wrong, this is apparently, these 2 individuals have written it down from a lady who got it through supposedly, apparently channeling Pythagoras, whatever this may mean again. However, the system is quite simple, quite interesting. And what I would like to remind everyone, if we understand reality is based on belief, and also the communication channels available to us are based on our beliefs and how open we are. again, it's not really then about considering, oh, should Y really be 7 or 8 and so on and so forth when you do the numbers. It's really much more about understanding for yourself this is a system that you use, and then you know you're using it. You know you allow your higher self to use precisely that system. At least that's, for example, how I do it. And I'm
Exactly
just
right.
saying I use it in that way just because I know that's the system I know. I don't know anything else. And I also know that if I'm flabbergasted or whatever, I don't know what to do, then I know that I will draw tarot cards, or I know I will do random numerology or number interpretations symbolically, and we'll get the message through that. And through the simple openness and belief, and over time then certainty eventually that this works, it works. And this can work with any book. So even this again is just a recommendation. And why this one? Because it includes the astrological connections, it explains them pretty well, and many of the meanings also are, I think, quite interesting to understand. And again, especially this relation with the numerology is very well explained.
They connected the tarot deck to that as well, and to be honest with you, that's the book that got me into my first tarot deck.
Yeah, I would say this is a really great starting point, especially in combination with the Rider-Waite deck. Again, just because I also started with the Thoth deck and just could understand some of it, and then through in particular this book and the Rider-Waite one and the very simple picturesque pictorial comic book almost type depictions in Rider-Waite, if one knows how to read it just a little bit, it can be a great combination, I think, to get a good starting point understanding, and especially also understand the numbers, as you always like to emphasize, because understanding even just the numbers 1 to 9 can give you great advantage in reading tarot.
The really great thing about numerology is that, numbers are always consistent, and that they define, it's not they're like prognosticators or something, but numbers define frequencies. And man, after thousands and thousands and thousands of readings, and I use that as part of evaluating everything, stuff in addresses, phone numbers, names of people I'm about to interact with, so I think understanding your own numbers is an amazing window into how you're structured, and a really fruitful bit of information to have about yourself.
And this is also explained conceptually in Divine Triangle. And I think I picked it up maybe for 15 euros or something. So it's not expensive at all. And it really, even just this book alone, if you understand it, gives you everything you need to start interpreting everything through numbers. And all I can say is it's a great trip. And if you give yourself the space to go into it, it can be quite revealing and just quite cool. And even is kind of a fallback mechanism, especially if maybe your usual approach doesn't work. Then you'd like, okay, I just do some numbers and then stare at the symbology long enough until I get some other idea about this whole thing.
Exactly.
So yeah, to me, that's really great. And then there's one more book I'd like to mention, which I also really enjoyed. This is by Marcus Katz. He's apparently some kind of famous guy in the UK. And the one book I read by him is called Tarosophy. This is, I would now call it more quote unquote down to earth, because he's talking about, let's say, psychological.
Would you say the title again, Raphael?
Yeah, the title is Tarosophy. So like philosophy, but Tarosophy. And so he's kind of giving a good understanding both about like what does it mean to do tarot, what are different approaches, what are psychological techniques to learn to be more associative within one's own brain, let's say. But he's also going into, let's say, the reality of being a tarot reader with some interesting statistics and so on. But also the basic understanding is quite psychological, and he even proposes some advanced version of the Tree of Life, which is really interesting. The only thing, my only critic, or let's say the only complaint, quote unquote, I would have about this book is that it's a little bit excluding, let's say, the real high spiritual stuff, it seemed to me. However, still, it's a great book if you're just aware of that. And also quite comprehensive and quite good information and well structured. So yeah, we have actually Harp, Wolkenbuch or Cloudbreak had been asking another question, and as we're just talking about numbers, I think it fits quite well. He's asking about the number 7. Of course, there's many associations. The only one thing maybe I may say about it, which you may not know, is that at least in the Galactic Heritage cards, which is like an alien tarot deck, let's say, the 7 is a card for Arcturus, which Arcturus in itself actually is a symbol, a very strong symbol for one's own higher self, even more strongly than other star systems. And number 7 then associated with unconditional love. So I think it's the perfect number to pick. Bryan, what do you say about the 7?
Well, 7 is historically associated with mysticism and specifically more intuitive sides of a person's self. 7 has all kinds of correspondent associations too, like 7 colors in the spectrum and 7 days of the week, and it's a definer of cycles for us in many different directions. So it winds up being a number that defines little compartments of actions and things and occurrences that are taking place. I find 7 to be a bit of a difficult number. I think it really relates to what your personal numbers are as to how you interact with 7. But like for me, 7 is not the greatest number. In the tarot deck, a lot of the 7s are kind of intense cards, like the 7 of Pentacles. That's a very difficult card, and that happens to show up in my number chart. The 7 of Swords. All the 7s are a little bit of a difficult scenario. They can be a bit emotional and a bit fly off the handle anger kind of scenarios, which is an area to really get control of, because those things can really get to be difficult. But 7 is also the number of shamans and mystics, and lots of magical people have that number.
So in this case, the reference I have is 7 reorganization. That the 7s, the minors, are like obviously already like a more developed state than a 3 or whatever. However, it's a state where after a more stable 6, everything is getting reshuffled once again. Maybe you want to mention something about that. And then, of course, I have to ask, what is the greatest number in the tarot, if there is one?
Well, okay, to the first part of it, moving from the 6s, if you look at the nature of the 6s in the tarot, you've got the 6 of Pentacles, which is you're receiving material benefits. You've got the 6 of Wands, which is excellent and success. You've got the 6 of Cups, which is joy and pleasure and success. So you've come from that state, and now you're moving into this next state, which sort of explains the degree of difficulty moving from those emotional goodnesses to the shadow side of those things, like moving from the 6 of Cups, which represents joy and pleasure and success, and moving to the 7 of Cups, which is kind of a yeah, exactly. Disillusionment and like, oh man, what I thought was great is really not so great. And there's a lot of ways to interpret that card, but none of them are really very good. And then it's the evolution onto the 8s, which there are a couple of those that are better. There are a couple of those that are a little difficult still, but then, it continues to be an evolution from those, and I find that like some of the first cards, like the fives, like pretty much all the fives suck, and pretty much all the sevens have a sucky side to them.
You read my mind just briefly, because I was about to mention this, because our commentator mentioned that 7 unconditional love is his topic, and I also heard this. Kindly mute your mic, just because there's some background noise which gets amplified.
I'm sorry. Yep.
Thank you. And so we get to hear Miami streets maybe in the background, which is also pretty cool. So anyhow, it was mentioned 7, the topic unconditional love, and also in relation to 5, you just mentioned the fives. As I understand, even though we can see everything neutrally, everything can be seen positive or negative, there is, let's say, a more connecting or segregating energy, base energy inherent to certain numbers, whether the card is, let's say, mechanistically more positive or more negative in its, let's say, base configuration. That's also how I understand it. However, even here within the minors, I believe there would be only about 13 or something that are negative out of 40. So that's the one thing. And then the question, because you also mentioned the 5, that was what I was thinking about. Some other numerology book mentioning the 5s, and there it's like the 5, it's the number of love. And I'm like, what the? Because of course you think of, 5 of wands or whatever, it's more like struggle or many energies coming together. It's strange, and
the
lot
5 of coins.
Yeah. You lose everything.
Yeah, great.
Exactly. So at least on a face value level, it looks not so great, even though here I have to say, many ideas coming together can be great. 5, Lord of Defeat, at air sign can be great. I always say, lay down your weapons, mental weapons. You don't need them. You can just chill out. So even here we have different perspectives. But still, on face value, saying that these 5 conditions or circumstance would be what would, from our current state of mind, generally be more difficult to process for many people if they are untrained, let's say. So maybe this is the association between the unconditional love 7 and or 5 with these apparently somewhat more mechanistically negative ideas, because that's kind of where you really need it, if you can catch my drift.
Yes, I would agree with that. It's kind of interesting that the 2 odd numbers, the ones that stay out of 369.
Precisely, very true.
I find it interesting that some of the other, say like the swords, you have the 9s, right? Within the 9 of swords, you've got or if you consider all of the 9s, right? You've got the 9 of Pentacles, which is just joyous and on the eve of miraculous things manifesting for you. And then you have the 9 of Swords, which is the ultimate of your own mental wrestling over a dilemma or a problem or something catastrophic, and thinking about how bad it's going to be. It's like the 2 most extreme things, in that number sequence, and the 10s are like that too. The 10 of Swords as opposed to the 10 of Pentacles or the 10 of Cups. It's kind of funny that you have most of those suits, or most of those numbers rather, having a duality about them, but the 7s and the 5s kind of have this universal sort of skew to them.
Right. I would agree. That's very interesting to consider. And there's actually so many different ways, many of them, for example, in a divine triangle, of how one can actually look at the tarot. And I just realized at some point, I'm still into it. I'm right now not using it that much currently. However, I realized at some point there's so many connections, and the more I try to get into it and find more connections and see how can I holographically now connect this idea, for example, this planet association with this card associated with this number or something, and well, in the right state of mind, of course, everything is connected. So I would just say it's a pretty interesting experience just to contemplate and really get into this. And probably also, I assume, if done from a balanced state, and with some discernment, I would assume even something that can overall greatly soothe one's general state of consciousness, because it makes one realize the interconnectedness of everything, and also how, at the same time, strangely enough, everything is relative and everything can be redefined. And the greatest example, of course, always first time seeing the death card, everyone thinks they're gonna die, and then learning about all the very positive things that can be associated here as well. Bryan.
I'm sorry, my mute finger was broken there for a second.
Yeah.
So, while we're on the tarot, I wanted to, it's coming up on like 8 years now that I designed that first deck, and it was such an amazing experience. And I'm coming up on now, this almost exactly the same time of year, I'm finishing up a third deck that goes in a troika of 3 decks, and it's been such an amazing evolution. Like the first deck was daunting, but I had a system. I had my knowledge of I'd read with the top deck for 25 years. So I had a really juicy working system to pull from. And then I added my own spin to that. I added a bunch of different ways to look at it, and other divination systems. Like you could do 5 different kinds of divination systems with that. And the illustrations were unique to me. I had never seen that kind of thing before. So it really became personalized, but it still was based off of another system of divination. Then the second deck happened, and that was the angel deck. And that was pulling off using the system of Shem HaMephorash, the 72 angels of God, and harkening back to the Manly P. Hall. And what was cool about that was, there was no divination system associated with that. There were the angelic system and the system of things, but there wasn't any divination system with that. So devising that was super fruitful as well. As a matter of fact, the manual for that deck is like 360 pages. That was just the craziest undertaking. And then the thing I'm super excited about.
May I interject?
Sure.
And just briefly, to anyone listening, so first of all, you can get those decks at wizardofod.com. If I didn't say it right, Bryan's going to correct me straight away.
Oh, perfect. Yeah.
Wizardofod.com, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Right.
That's Wizard with a Y too. Not
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And not just that, but still, if there is a printer publisher with some, let's say, aesthetic sense and appreciation of magical ability, I would greatly encourage contacting Bryan to actually get a lot more of these decks printed, because at least to me, everyone may look at them and there's high-res images on the page. Still to this day, I honestly haven't seen one that's more unique and also just aesthetically and, let's say, magically pleasing.
Wow, thank you very much. And yes, if there are any printers out there, I would love to push these forth. And I'm getting ready to undertake, now that the last deck is finished. Well, what's great about the last deck coming to fruition is I abandoned all previous divination systems, and this one is entirely my own cosmology, which was just a miraculous journey. I just can't even begin to tell you. I learned so much, and so many pieces of a larger puzzle came together for me, and oh man, it was just a wonderful thing. So I'm wanting to release all 3 decks as part of a box set and get those out there. And so yes, please, printers, would love to connect with you. And thanks for mentioning that, Raphael.
Certainly. Well, I only talk about stuff I like, so don't worry. It's no effort on my part.
You know, you were among the first group of people that actually bought it. So it's like it's going on like 8 years for you now. You've had that deck. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I have it maybe since maybe 5 years or something, but what I know is at least locally, whatever this may mean energetically, there is a few of those decks in Vienna and in Austria even from what I personally know. So yeah.
You know, I've actually I did a total of how many decks I've actually sold, and it's well over 3,000, and they're all over the world, man. They're in New Zealand and Australia, and it's kind of interesting that people that would really relate to them wind up seeking them out, and it's become this kind of larger family that I'm just enjoying that. You know, you talk about connections, having those connections and seeing how other people interpret them and how they've kind of grown out in the world and other people make use of them, and their experiences and stories back have been really unexpected and richly rewarding experience for sure.
And it's just great, again, when one allows oneself symbolic interpretation and just going with the flow and intuition and just being oneself ultimately. Even as I remember how we connected, the first thing, because it is just my personal journey, I was talking about a number 26, only quickly to realize it's actually your number, according to the system you were then about to teach me, quote unquote.
Exactly, my life lesson number.
So yeah, I think I know I am thanking you for this expose and this very great conversation. We actually have the next live show coming up at 8 p.m. Therefore, I'd be closing it out right now. However, I would say most certainly we are looking forward to you coming back and just continuing with all these wonderfully interesting topics. Harp also says, thank you for your presence. We thank you as well.
You're so welcome, and thanks for participating with us. And I have a really good time doing this. Thank you very much. It's awesome, and you play great music, dude.